Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories from truck stops across Arizona. These are tales of drivers who stopped for fuel or rest in the desert night and encountered something that still haunts them years later. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The Love's travel stop off I-40 near Holbrook sits in this stretch of desert that feels like it goes on forever in every direction. I'd been driving commercial routes for about 4 years when this happened, hauling refrigerated goods from Flagstaff down to Phoenix and back. It was decent money, and I liked the solitude mostly. My dispatcher told me the refrigeration unit on my trailer had been acting up lately, cycling on and off at weird intervals, but it hadn't failed a temperature check yet, so they wanted me to finish the route. I pulled into that truck stop around 2:30 in the morning on a Thursday, or maybe it was a Friday. The days blur together when you're doing overnight hauls. The lot was maybe a quarter full, big rigs scattered across the parking lanes with their running lights on. I needed coffee badly, the kind that tastes like burnt rubber but keeps you awake, and I'd been putting off checking the refrigeration unit for the last hour. The temperature gauge in my cab kept flickering between normal and slightly elevated, just enough to make me nervous. The building itself looked standard enough. Bright fluorescent lights bleeding out through the windows, one of those yellow and red signs that you can spot from miles away on the highway. When I walked in, there was just one clerk behind the counter, this older guy with deep-set eyes who looked like he hadn't slept in about 3 days. He nodded at me but didn't say anything. The coffee station was in the back corner next to the restrooms, and I remember the pot was nearly empty. The coffee that came out looked thick, almost syrupy. I was standing there adding sugar packets when I heard it the first time, a tapping sound, rhythmic, 3 taps, pause, 3 more taps. It was coming from somewhere outside toward the truck lot. I told myself it was probably just wind catching a loose panel on one of the trailers. Happened all the time. But something about the pattern felt too deliberate, too measured. The clerk was watching me when I came back to pay. "You parked out in the back lanes?" he asked. "Yeah, lane 7, I said. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. He just rang up my coffee and a bag of beef jerky I'd grabbed, moving slowly like he was thinking about whether to say something. Finally, he said, "Might want to check your trailer locks before you settle in for the night. We've had some activity lately." I asked him what he meant by activity, but he just shook his head and told me to have a safe drive. The way he said it didn't sound like a standard goodbye, it sounded like a warning. When I got back outside, the temperature had dropped noticeably. Desert nights do that, but this felt more sudden than usual. My breath was fogging in the air. I could see my truck sitting out in lane 7, the cab light still on from when I'd left. The refrigeration unit was humming normally now, no more flickering on the gauge. That's when I noticed the other driver. He was standing between 2 trailers about 3 spaces down from mine, just standing there in the gap. At first I thought maybe he was doing a walk-around inspection or taking a smoke break, but he wasn't moving. He was wearing what looked like a standard trucker jacket and jeans, but something about his posture seemed wrong. His arms hung straight down at his sides, completely still, and his head was tilted at this slight angle like he was listening to something. I called out, "You okay over there?" He didn't respond, didn't even turn his head. I started walking toward my truck, keeping an eye on him, and that's when I saw that his feet weren't quite touching the ground. Just slightly elevated, maybe an inch or 2, but enough that I could see the gap between his boots and the pavement in the overhead lights. My mouth went dry. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the shadows, the angle I was looking from. Maybe he was standing on something I couldn't see, but I couldn't make myself believe it. The space between his boots and the ground was clear, nothing underneath him. I picked up my pace toward my truck, not quite running but moving fast. I heard the tapping again, louder now. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. It was coming from my trailer. When I got close enough, I could see fresh scratches on the side panel, long gouges in the metal that definitely weren't there when I'd pulled in. They were arranged in sets of 3, running vertically down from about 6 feet high to waist level. I spun around to look back at where the figure had been standing, but the gap between the trailers was empty now. The parking lot was completely silent except for the hum of refrigeration units and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. No wind, no movement, just that heavy desert silence that makes your ears ring. That's when my trailer rocked slightly, like something had bumped against it from the inside. I knew I'd locked those doors. I'd done the same routine check I always did before leaving the distribution center. But I also knew the temperature gauge had been acting weird, and now I was thinking about what the clerk had said. Activity. What kind of activity makes fresh scratches on a trailer and causes it to rock from the inside when it's supposed to be full of nothing but stacked pallets of frozen goods? I walked around to the back doors and my hands were shaking when I pulled out my flashlight. The lock was still in place, the seal unbroken, but there was something else. Pressed against the door right at eye level was a handprint, not on the outside, on the inside. I could see it clearly through the small gap between the door and the frame. Someone's palm and fingers pressed flat against the inside of the door, like they were trying to push it open. The print was too pale. That's what got me. It wasn't the normal color of skin, not even close. It looked bleached, almost white, and the fingers were too long. They extended past where fingers should reasonably end, each one the length of my whole hand. I stepped back fast, nearly tripping over my own feet. The tapping started again, but now it was coming from multiple places. My trailer, the trailer next to mine, one further down the row. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, like something was moving between them, announcing itself. I didn't check the inside of my trailer. I got in my cab, started the engine, and pulled out of that truck stop faster than I should have with a full load. I didn't care about the coffee I just bought or the mandatory rest period I was supposed to take. I drove straight through to Phoenix, checking my mirrors every 30 seconds, waiting to see that figure appear on the road behind me. When I finally reached the distribution center and they opened up my trailer, everything was fine. The temperature logs showed it had maintained proper cold chain the entire trip. The pallets were exactly where they should be, nothing disturbed. But one of the workers found something wedged between 2 boxes in the back corner. It was a piece of fabric, looked like it had been torn from someone's jacket. The same kind of jacket I'd seen on that figure in the parking lot. The fabric was ice cold when they pulled it out, even though it had been sitting in an area that was only supposed to be at refrigeration temperature, not freezing. And when I looked at it closer, I saw what looked like part of a name tag still attached to the fabric. The letters were faded, but I could make out DNNYS and part of what might have been a name below it. I asked the distribution center manager if they'd had any issues with the trailer before it got assigned to me. He checked the logs and went quiet for a minute. Then he told me that trailer had been sitting unused for almost 8 months. The last driver who'd hauled it had abandoned it at a truck stop in New Mexico and quit the company without explanation. When they recovered the trailer, they found scratches on the inside of the doors. I don't take routes through Hallbrook anymore. I told my dispatcher I'd rather drive an extra 2 hours than stop anywhere near that Love's. When he asked why, I couldn't really explain it in a way that didn't sound crazy. How do you tell someone that you saw a man floating between trailers, that something was knocking from inside a sealed refrigerated unit, that you found a piece of clothing that shouldn't exist? Sometimes when I'm driving at night and I see a truck stop in the distance, all lit up against the dark desert, I wonder how many drivers have pulled in there and heard that tapping. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. and I wonder how many of them checked their trailers to see what was making the sound. I'm glad I didn't open those doors. I don't think I would have liked what I found pressing its two long fingers against the inside, trying to get out. Story 2. My uncle Raphael owned a small transport company that mostly did regional deliveries around southern Arizona. When I was 23, I just finished a rough breakup and needed work that would keep me busy, so he offered me a job running short hauls between Tucson and Yuma. The routes were easy, mostly daytime stuff, but occasionally he'd have me do an overnight delivery if one of his regular drivers called in sick. That's how I ended up at the Chevron station outside Gila Bend on a Tuesday night in October. I wasn't even supposed to stop there. My route was straight through to Yuma, drop off a load of industrial parts, then head back to Tucson before morning. But my check engine light had been on for about 20 miles, and the temperature gauge was starting to climb. I figured I'd rather pull over and let it cool down than risk blowing something and being stranded in the actual middle of nowhere. The station was small, just 4 pumps and a little convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. The parking area had space for maybe 6 or 7 vehicles total, but there was only one other car there when I pulled in. An old sedan, maybe a Buick with California plates. The paint was sun-faded to the point where I couldn't tell what color it was supposed to be. I popped my hood and let the engine sit while I went inside to grab some water. The woman behind the counter looked to be in her 50s, heavy-set, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She was doing a crossword puzzle and barely glanced up when the door chimed. "Engine trouble?" she asked without looking at me. "Just running hot," I said. "Thought I'd let it cool before pushing on to Yuma." She nodded slowly, still focused on her puzzle. "Might want to make it quick. We close the pumps at midnight." I checked my phone. It was 11:40. "I'll be out of here in 15 minutes, I told her. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like something organic that had been left out in the sun too long. Spoiled meat mixed with that dusty desert smell. I figured maybe their dumpster was too close to the building, or some animal had died under the foundation. The clerk didn't seem to notice it, or at least she wasn't reacting to it. I paid for my water and a Red Bull, then headed back outside. The other car was still sitting there, but now the driver's door was open. Nobody around it, no one visible inside. The interior light was on, and I could see the driver's seat was empty. I looked around the parking lot, thinking maybe they'd gone to the restroom, but the building only had one entrance, and I would have seen them come in. My truck engine had cooled down enough that the temperature gauge was back in the normal range. I was about to close the hood when I heard someone say my name. "Marcus." It was my ex-girlfriend's voice, clear as anything, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly hit my head on the raised hood. There was nobody there. The parking lot was empty except for my truck and that abandoned sedan with its door hanging open. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded weird in the stillness, too loud and too small at the same time. Nobody answered, but I heard footsteps, light and quick, coming from the side of the building. They moved across the pavement and then stopped somewhere near the air pump station. I walked over slowly, my heart doing this uncomfortable hammering thing in my chest. When I got to the corner, I could see the air pump clearly in the overhead light. There was nobody there. The footsteps started again, but now they were behind me. I turned and saw nothing. Then they moved to my left, then my right, circling around me in the empty lot. Fast little steps, like someone running barefoot on pavement. But there was nobody. I could hear them clearly, the slap of feet, the scuff of skin on concrete, but I couldn't see anyone. "Marcus, wait for me." My ex's voice again, but wrong somehow. The pitch was right, the words were something she might say, but the tone was off, too flat, like someone doing an impression of her without understanding the emotion behind the words. I backed up toward my truck, not taking my eyes off the parking lot. That's when I saw the sedan's interior light flicker and go out. Then it came back on, then off again. On, off, like someone was playing with the door, opening and closing it. But I still couldn't see anyone near the car. The smell hit me again, much stronger now. That rotting organic smell, but with something else underneath it. Something chemical, like formaldehyde or heavy disinfectant. It was coming from the sedan. I don't know why I walked toward it. Part of me knew I should get in my truck and leave, but there was this other part that needed to understand what was happening. The door was still opening and closing, and now I could hear the hinges creaking with each movement. When I got about 10 feet away, the movement stopped. The door hung open, the interior light steady now. There was something on the passenger seat. At first I thought it was just a jacket or a bag, but when I got closer I realized it was a shirt. A woman's shirt, white with small blue flowers on it. There was a dark stain down the front, spreading out from the collar area. The stain looked wet even though the shirt was clearly old, sun-damaged around the edges. Behind me the footsteps started again, but they weren't circling anymore. They were coming straight toward me, fast, like someone running full speed. I could hear breathing too, rapid and raspy, getting closer. I turned around and there was nothing there, but the sound kept coming. The footsteps were maybe 5 feet away, then 3, then right in front of me. Something cold touched my face. Just a brush of ice-cold fingers across my cheek, so brief I almost thought I imagined it. But my skin stung where it touched, like I'd been brushed with something frozen. I ran, got in my truck, didn't even close the hood properly, just slammed it down and climbed into the cab. The engine turned over on the first try, thank God, and I threw it in reverse. As I was backing up, I looked at the store window and saw the clerk standing there watching me. She wasn't doing her crossword anymore. She was just standing at the window with her hands pressed flat against the glass, staring out at me with no expression on her face at all. The sedan's door was still open when I pulled out onto the highway. In my rearview mirror, I could see the interior light flickering again. On, off, on, off. I called my uncle when I got to Yuma and told him I needed a different route. He asked why and I gave him some excuse about the truck overheating, said I didn't trust that stretch of highway. He didn't push it. But a few days later, he mentioned that one of his other drivers had stopped at that same Chevron station and reported some weird experience. Hearing voices, seeing movement that wasn't there. The driver quit the next day. I looked up the location online when I got back to Tucson, trying to see if there was any history there. There wasn't much, but I found an old news article from about 6 years ago about a woman who disappeared somewhere between Gila Bend and Yuma. Her car had been found at a gas station, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. She was never found. The article didn't say which gas station, but it included a photo of the missing woman. She was wearing a white shirt with small blue flowers on it. Story 3. I started working overnight security for a logistics company called Southwest Freight Solutions when I was 31. It wasn't glamorous work. Mostly I drove around to their various facilities checking locks and making sure nobody was breaking into the trailers parked in their yards. The company had maybe 8 or 9 locations scattered across Arizona, and the overnight shift meant I could avoid traffic and get paid a little extra for the inconvenience of working while everyone else was asleep. One of the facilities was this truck stop arrangement near Wilcox, way out on I-10. It wasn't a public truck stop exactly, more like a private lot that the company leased for drivers to park overnight when they were between hauls. There was a small office building, a maintenance shed, and rows of parking lanes for trucks and trailers. Maybe space for 40 vehicles total. Most nights there'd be 10 or 12 trucks parked there, drivers sleeping in their cabs or in the small rest area inside the office. My supervisor, a guy named Ken Portman who'd been with the company for 15 years, told me that the Wilcox facility was usually quiet. "Nothing ever happens out there," he said during my training. "You'll check the perimeter fence, make sure the gate's locked, do a walkthrough of the office, and that's it. Easiest stop on your route." For the first 3 months, he was right. I'd roll in around 1 or 2 in the morning, spend 15 minutes doing my check, mark it complete in my log, and move on to the next facility. Sometimes I'd see drivers moving around, heading to the restroom or grabbing something from their truck. We'd nod at each other but rarely talked. Night shift has its own culture of silence. Then in early March, things changed. I pulled into the lot on a Wednesday night, or technically Thursday morning. It was about 1:45, and immediately noticed that something felt off. There were 8 trucks parked in the lanes, all spaced out normally, but the lot was darker than usual. Some of the overhead lights were out, and the ones that were working seemed dimmer somehow. I told myself it was probably just bulbs burning out. Maintenance would fix it during the day, but it made the shadows between the trucks deeper and harder to see into. I did my usual routine, checking the fence line first. Everything was secure. The gate was locked, no signs of tampering. When I got to the office building, I noticed the front door was propped open with a rubber wedge. That wasn't normal. The door was supposed to be closed and locked at night, with drivers using their key cards to get in if needed. I pushed the door open wider and called out, "Security, anyone in here?" No response. The office was small, just a front reception area with a couple of chairs, a hallway leading back to the restrooms and a break room, and a small operations office where the day manager worked. The lights were all off except for the exit signs, which gave everything this dim red tint. I flipped on the hallway lights and walked back toward the break room. That's when I smelled it. Diesel fuel, strong enough that my eyes watered. But there was something else under it, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. I checked the break room first, empty, nothing unusual. The smell was stronger near the back door, the one that led out to the maintenance shed. The back door was also propped open. I could see out into the lot where the maintenance shed sat about 30 yards away. The shed's door was wide open too, and there was a light on inside, even though nobody should have been working at that hour. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out toward the shed. The smell of diesel got stronger with every step, and now I could hear something too. A wet, dragging sound like someone pulling a heavy tarp across concrete. It would drag for a few seconds, stop, then drag again. When I got to the shed entrance, I stopped and shone my flashlight inside. The space was cluttered with tools, spare parts, and maintenance equipment. Oil stains covered most of the concrete floor. In the back corner, I could see something moving. It looked like a person crouched down, their back to me, doing something I couldn't quite make out. They were wearing dark clothing and their shoulders were hunched forward. "Hey," I called out, "you're not supposed to be in here at night. This area is restricted after hours." The figure stopped moving. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then it stood up slowly, rising to its full height, and I realized something was very wrong with its proportions. It was too tall. Not like basketball player tall, but stretched somehow, like someone had taken a normal-sized person and pulled them upward until their body didn't fit together right anymore. It turned around to face me, and I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that its head was tilted at this extreme angle, almost 90 degrees to the left, like its neck was broken. But it was still standing, still moving. Where its face should have been was just smooth, pale skin, no features I could distinguish. Or maybe the angle was wrong and I just couldn't see them properly. I don't know. I didn't want to look long enough to figure it out. The dragging sound started again, but it wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from behind me. I spun around and saw something dark and low to the ground moving between 2 parked trucks. It was pulling itself along the pavement using its arms, leaving a wet trail behind it. I couldn't see details, just the basic shape of it, the way it moved in this jerking, unnatural rhythm. My radio crackled with static, then a voice came through. It sounded like dispatch, but the words were wrong. Not English, not Spanish, not any language I recognized. Just sounds that might have been words in some other context, coming through in bursts between waves of static. I backed away from the maintenance shed, keeping my flashlight pointed at the tall figure inside. It hadn't moved again, just stood there with its broken angle head, watching me. Or maybe not watching, without eyes, how could I tell? That's when I heard the truck engines start, all of them. All 8 trucks in the lot fired up simultaneously, their diesel engines roaring to life, even though I could see through the windows that there was nobody in the cabs. The headlights came on too, all pointing in different directions, creating this chaotic network of light beams cutting through the darkness. The thing that had been dragging itself across the pavement was gone. I couldn't see it anymore in all the confusion of moving lights and shadows, but I could hear more of them now, multiple sources of that wet, dragging sound coming from different parts of the lot. They were circling around me, staying just outside the reach of the truck headlights. I ran back toward the office building, my boots pounding on the asphalt. Behind me, I heard something that might have been footsteps or might have been something else, something with too many points of contact hitting the ground. The sound was getting closer, matching my pace, and I didn't want to turn around to see what was making it. I made it to my security vehicle, a company SUV parked near the office entrance, and got inside, locking the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before getting them in the ignition. As I started the engine, I looked back at the lot through my rearview mirror. The truck engines were still running, headlights still on, but now I could see figures moving between them. Lots of figures. Some were tall like the one in the shed, some were low to the ground like the dragging thing, and some were just shapes I couldn't properly understand. They moved in and out of the light beams, never staying visible long enough for me to get a clear look. I drove out of there without completing my security check, without logging anything in my report. The gate was somehow open even though I'd checked it locked just 20 minutes earlier. I didn't stop to question it. I just drove through and kept driving until I was back on the interstate, heading toward the next facility on my route. When I got there, a facility near Benson that was always quiet and well lit, I sat in my vehicle for 10 minutes trying to steady my breathing. My radio crackled again, and this time it was actual dispatch. They were asking why I hadn't completed my check-in at Wilcox. I told them I'd had vehicle trouble and had to skip it. They logged it as an incomplete and said someone would do a day check instead. The next morning, I called Ken and told him I needed to talk about the Wilcox facility. He met me for coffee and listened while I tried to explain what I'd seen. When I finished, he didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "Yeah," he said, "that happens sometimes out there." I asked him what the hell he meant by that happens sometimes, and he told me that about 2 years ago, a driver had died in the maintenance shed. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a poorly ventilated engine repair. They found him 3 days after it happened. Since then, several overnight security guards had reported strange experiences at that location, figures in the shed, sounds that didn't make sense, equipment running on its own. "Why didn't you tell me about this during training?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because most people don't see anything. And the ones who do usually quit right after. You lasted longer than most." I handed in my resignation the following week. Ken tried to convince me to stay, said I could skip the Wilcox facility entirely and they'd have someone else cover it. But I couldn't shake the image of those things moving between the trucks, the way that tall figure had stood there with its impossible neck angle, the wet dragging sounds in the darkness. Sometimes I drive past that exit on I-10 and think about what might still be happening in that lot at night. Whether the trucks still start up on their own, whether that tall figure is still standing in the maintenance shed, waiting for someone to shine a light on it. I wonder if the new security guard has seen anything, and if so, whether they've figured out yet that some facilities aren't just places where trucks park for the night. Story 4. My girlfriend Chloe and I decided to drive from Phoenix to Santa Fe for a long weekend in April. We'd been talking about taking a trip together for months, and she finally had a break from her nursing schedule that lined up with my time off from the construction company where I worked. The drive was supposed to take about 7 hours, but we weren't in a rush. We left late, around 8 in the evening, figuring we'd drive through the night and arrive in time for breakfast. Everything was fine until we hit that stretch of highway between Holbrook and the New Mexico border. It's mostly empty desert out there, long straight roads with nothing but darkness on either side once you get far enough from town. We'd been driving for maybe 3 hours, and Chloe had fallen asleep in the passenger seat with a hoodie bunched up as a pillow. That's when my low fuel light came on. I'd meant to fill up in Holbrook, but we'd driven straight through, and now I was looking at maybe 30 miles of range left. I checked my phone for the nearest gas station. There was one coming up in about 10 miles, marked as a 24-hour truck stop called Desert Diamond Travel Plaza. The name sounded generic enough, probably one of those independent operations that served truckers and the occasional lost tourist. The exit came up quickly, and I took it, following the access road for about a mile before I saw the lights of the station. It was bigger than I expected, with separate lanes for trucks and cars, a fairly large store, and even a small diner attached to the side. The parking lot had maybe 20 vehicles in it, which seemed like a lot for such a remote location. I pulled up to one of the car pumps and got out to fill the tank. The air was cold, much colder than I expected for April. My breath fogged when I exhaled. Chloe stirred in the passenger seat but didn't wake up. I figured I'd let her sleep while I went inside to pay and grab some snacks. The store was brighter than it needed to be, fluorescent lights harsh enough to make me squint after the darkness of the highway. There was a young guy behind the counter, maybe early 20s, with a name tag that said Brandon in faded letters. He was staring at his phone and didn't look up when I came in. I grabbed a couple of bags of chips and some bottles of iced tea, then went to the counter. Brandon rang me up without making eye contact, his fingers moving mechanically across the register keys. When he told me the total, I noticed his hand was shaking slightly. "You okay?" I asked. He finally looked at me, and his eyes had this exhausted, stressed quality that I recognized from guys I'd worked with who were dealing with serious problems at home. "Yeah, fine," he said, "just a long shift." I paid and headed back outside. That's when I noticed the diner was empty, completely empty. Not just no customers, no staff either. I could see through the windows that all the lights were on, tables set with menus and salt shakers, but nobody inside. It seemed weird for a place that was supposedly open 24 hours, but maybe the night shift cook was on break. When I got back to my car, Chloe was awake. She was sitting up straight in her seat, staring out at the parking lot with this confused expression. "Hey," I said as I opened the driver's door. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "Did you see that?" she asked without looking at me. "See what?" There was someone standing next to the car, right outside my window. They were just standing there looking in at me. I looked around the parking lot. There were plenty of other vehicles, but I didn't see anyone walking around. "What did they look like?" She shook her head. "I don't know, I couldn't see their face. They were wearing a hood or something, but they were so close, right up against the window. When I sat up, they backed away and walked toward the trucks. I felt uneasy now, but I tried to play it off. Probably just another traveler. This place is pretty busy for the middle of nowhere." We got back on the road, merging onto the highway. I was still thinking about what Chloe had said and about Brandon's shaking hands when she spoke again. "That place felt wrong," she said quietly. "When I woke up, I could see the diner through the windshield. There were people inside. The diner was empty," I told her. "I walked right past it, nobody there." She turned to look at me. "I saw them, Marcus. There were at least 6 or 7 people sitting at different tables. They weren't eating or talking. They were all just sitting there facing the windows, facing me." I wanted to tell her she'd been half asleep, seeing things that weren't there. But something about the certainty in her voice stopped me. We drove in silence for a while, and I kept checking my rearview mirror even though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. About 20 minutes later, Chloe gasped and grabbed my arm. "Stop the car." "What? Why?" "Just pull over. Right now." I pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights on, and looked at her. She had her phone out and was scrolling through something frantically. "What's wrong?" I asked. She held up her phone, showing me a map. "That gas station we stopped at, it's not there." I looked at the map. She was right. According to the GPS, the location where we just stopped showed nothing but empty desert. No truck stop, no desert diamond travel plaza, no building at all. "That's just the map not being updated," I said, but I felt my stomach tighten. "Those mapping apps miss stuff all the time." She zoomed in on the area. "Then, why does it show all the other gas stations along the highway? Look, there's one 40 miles back in Holbrook, and there's one 50 miles ahead near Gallup. But nothing where we just stopped." I tried to remember the details of the station. Had I seen a company logo, any signs indicating what brand of fuel they sold? Now that I thought about it, I couldn't remember seeing any branding at all, just that generic name on a lit-up sign. "Call the number on your receipt," Chloe said. I pulled out my wallet and found the receipt Brandon had given me. There was a phone number printed at the top. I dialed it on my phone and put it on speaker. It rang 4 times, then a recorded message played. "The number you have reached is not in service. Please check the number and try again." We looked at each other. My mouth was dry and I could feel my heart beating faster than it should. "Maybe we should go back," I said, though I didn't want to, "figure out what's going on." Chloe shook her head firmly. "No, we should keep driving." We got back on the highway and kept going toward New Mexico. Neither of us felt like sleeping anymore. Chloe kept checking the map on her phone, verifying that we were where we thought we were, that the road we were on actually existed in the database. About an hour later, just as we were crossing into New Mexico, my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. The message read, "You left your credit card at the pump. Brandon." I looked at my wallet. My credit card was right there in its slot. I hadn't left anything at the pump. I'd paid inside with cash. Chloe saw the message and her face went pale. "Don't respond," she said. Another text came through from the same number. "You should come back. Chloe forgot something too." The phone buzzed again before I could even process the second message. This time it was a photo. The image took a second to load, and when it did, I felt my hands go numb. It was a picture of our car taken from inside the diner. You could see through the windows of the diner, across the parking lot, straight to where we'd been parked. The photo showed Chloe asleep in the passenger seat, a hoodie bunched under her head, and standing next to the driver's side window, exactly where she'd said someone had been, was a figure in a hooded jacket. The hood was up, obscuring the face, but the figure's hands were pressed flat against the car window. The fingers were wrong somehow, too long with too many joints. I blocked the number and threw my phone into the back seat. Chloe was shaking, her arms wrapped around herself. We drove in silence for the rest of the trip, and we didn't stop again until we were safely in Santa Fe in broad daylight, surrounded by normal people doing normal things. A few days after we got back to Phoenix, I tried to look up the Desert Diamond Travel Plaza online. I couldn't find any record of it. No business license, no reviews, no photos, nothing. I even called the State Department of Transportation to ask if there was a rest stop or truck plaza at that exit. The woman I spoke with checked their records and told me that exit was closed for construction, had been closed for 8 months, but I have the receipt in my wallet. I can see the date, the time, the items I purchased. I have the photo that was texted to my phone, even though I wish I didn't. And Chloe still won't drive through that part of Arizona at night. When I suggested we take another road trip, she said she'd go anywhere I wanted, as long as it didn't involve stopping at places that might not exist. Story 5. I worked dispatch for a regional trucking outfit called Mesa Verde Transport for about 6 months before this happened. My job was mostly boring, assigning routes, coordinating pickup times, handling the occasional complaint from a driver who didn't like their schedule. The pay was okay and the hours were steady night shift from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., which meant I could take classes during the day and still make rent. Our office was in Flagstaff, but we had drivers all over the state. Most of them were good people, experienced haulers who'd been doing it for years. One of them was a woman named Virginia Chen who'd been with the company for almost a decade. She ran regular routes between Phoenix and the New Mexico border, mostly carrying automotive parts. She was reliable, always on time, never complained. On a Friday night in September, I remember it was Friday because we always had fewer active routes on weekends, I got a call from Virginia around 11:30. She was parked at a truck stop somewhere near Chambers, said her engine was making a weird knocking sound and she wanted to let it cool down before continuing. She sounded tired but fine, said she'd be back on the road within an hour. "Which stop are you at?" I asked, pulling up our list of approved parking locations. We had agreements with certain facilities where our drivers could park overnight without any fees. "It's called..." She paused, and I heard her moving around in her cab, probably looking for a sign. "Red Canyon Truck Plaza. It's off exit 333. I checked my list. We didn't have Red Canyon on our approved locations, but that didn't necessarily mean anything. Drivers stopped wherever they needed to if there was a mechanical issue. "Okay, log it in your drive time report. You need me to send a mechanic out?" "No, I think it's just overheating. I'll let it sit for a while and see how it sounds after it cools." "All right. Check in with me before you get back on the road." "Will do." She hung up and I went back to monitoring the other drivers on my board. We had maybe 8 trucks out that night, all at various points along their routes. Everything looked normal. About 45 minutes later, my phone rang again, Virginia's number. I picked up, expecting her to tell me she was ready to continue. Instead, I heard her breathing, fast, panicked breathing. No words, just the sound of her trying to catch her breath. "Virginia, you okay?" More breathing. Then, in a whisper, "There's someone outside my truck." I sat up straighter in my chair. "What do you mean someone's outside your truck? Like another driver?" "No," she whispered. "Not another driver, just standing there, about 10 feet away from my cab. They've been standing there for the past 5 minutes, not moving." I pulled up her location on my GPS system. She was showing as stationary, right where she'd said she was. "Can you see what they look like?" "I can't see their face. They're wearing something over their head, like a sack or a bag, but they're tall, really tall." "Have they tried to approach your truck? Knocked on the door or anything?" "No, they're just standing there, staring. I think they're staring. I can't tell." I tried to keep my voice calm. Okay, keep your doors locked. I'm going to call the police and have them send someone out to check on you. Wait, she said. There's more of them now. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, more of them? There are 3 of them. They just appeared. They're all standing in different spots around my truck. Same thing, tall, wearing something over their heads, not moving. I was already dialing the local sheriff's department on my other line. Stay on the phone with me, I'm getting help. The sheriff's department put me through to dispatch. I explained the situation. One of my drivers was parked at Red Canyon Truck Plaza near Chambers. Someone was harassing her. She needed immediate assistance. The dispatcher said she'd send a unit out, but it would take at least 20 minutes. They were dealing with an accident on the interstate and units were tied up. I relayed that to Virginia. 20 minutes? Can you wait 20 minutes? They're getting closer, she whispered. All 3 of them, they're moving now, slow steps. Can you start your truck? Drive out of there? I don't know if the engine's cooled enough. If it seizes up, I'll be stuck. Try it anyway. Get out of there. I heard her moving around in the cab, the jingle of keys. Then the sound of the engine turning over. It caught for a second, sputtered, died. She tried again, same result. It's not starting, she said, and now I could hear real fear in her voice. They're right next to the truck now, all 3 of them, standing in a circle around my cab. Can you see any details? What they're wearing? Any vehicles nearby? No vehicles, just them. And there, I don't think those are sacks on their heads. I think that's what they look like their heads are wrapped in something or they don't have faces, I can't tell. Virginia, stay calm. Help is coming. One of them is reaching up toward my door handle. My heart was pounding. I felt completely helpless, sitting in an office 60 miles away while one of my drivers was clearly in danger. Don't open that door. No matter what they do, don't open it. I'm not going to. She stopped mid-sentence. What's happening? They're gone. What? They just disappeared, all 3 of them. One second they were right there, the next second they're just gone. I didn't see them walk away. They just aren't there anymore. I didn't know what to say. Are you sure? I'm looking all around the lot. There's nowhere for them to hide. They're just gone. Okay, good. Police are still on their way. You sit tight until they get there. Jake, she said, that was my name. There's something you should know. I looked up at the store while I was watching those things through the window. There were people inside, at least a dozen people. They were all standing at the windows looking out at me. They weren't moving either, just standing there. A chill went down my back. Are they still there? Let me look. A pause. The lights in the store are off now. I can't see inside anymore. The sheriff's deputy arrived about 15 minutes later. I stayed on the phone with Virginia the whole time, listening to her describe every small sound, every shadow she thought she saw moving in the lot. When the deputy's headlights finally came into view, she let out a breath I didn't realize she'd been holding. The deputy checked the area around her truck and found nothing unusual. No signs of anyone having been there, no footprints, no other vehicles. The store was locked and dark, which was strange because it was supposedly a 24-hour facility. He tried calling the number listed on the door but got no answer. Virginia's engine started up fine on the first try. The deputy followed her to the interstate and made sure she got back on the highway safely. She completed her route to New Mexico without any other incidents. When she came back to the office a few days later to file her drive time reports, she asked me to pull up the location of Red Canyon Truck Plaza. I tried to find it in our system, then in Google Maps, then in every database I had access to. There was no Red Canyon Truck Plaza near Chambers. There was no exit 333 on that stretch of highway. The exits jumped from 331 to 335. Virginia showed me her GPS log from that night. It clearly showed her truck stationary at coordinates that, when I looked them up, placed her on the side of the highway. Not at a truck stop, not at a parking area, just pulled over on the shoulder, but she'd been somewhere. She'd been parked with her engine off for over an hour. She'd seen a store, seen people in the windows, been surrounded by those tall figures with covered faces. And I'd been on the phone with her the entire time, hearing her fear, hearing her describe things that apparently didn't exist. She quit 2 weeks later. Took a job doing local deliveries in Phoenix, daytime routes only, nothing that would require overnight stops. She told me she appreciated my help that night, that she knew I'd done everything I could, but she couldn't drive those long, empty stretches anymore. Couldn't risk pulling over somewhere that might not be real. I left Mesa Verde Transport about a month after that. Took a job at a warehouse doing inventory management. No more night shifts, no more monitoring drivers on dark highways. But I still think about that call sometimes. About the sound of Virginia's breathing when she was trying to stay quiet. About those figures standing around her truck in a parking lot that doesn't exist. About the people she saw standing in the windows, all of them watching her. And I wonder how many other drivers have pulled off at exits that aren't on any map, stopped at facilities that don't show up in any database, and encountered things that circle their trucks in the darkness. I wonder how many of them made it back to the highway, and how many of them are still sitting there, waiting for help that will never arrive, because nobody can find the place they're calling from. Story 6. The summer I turned 28, I took a job driving for a small family-owned courier service called Sonora Express. My dad knew the owner from church and put in a word for me after I'd spent 6 months unemployed following the collapse of the construction industry in 2009. The job wasn't glamorous, delivering packages and documents between businesses across southern Arizona, but it paid enough to cover my rent, and I liked being on the road rather than stuck in an office. Most of my deliveries were straightforward. Phoenix to Tucson, Tucson to Yuma, sometimes up to Prescott or Show Low. I drove a white cargo van with the company logo on the side, and I had a company phone that I was supposed to keep charged and answer whenever dispatch called. The routes were usually planned out for me in advance, but sometimes I'd get last-minute additions if a client needed something urgent. That's what happened on a Wednesday in July. I was finishing up my regular Tucson route when I got a call from Rita, our dispatcher, saying she had an emergency pickup. A law office in Tucson needed a sealed envelope delivered to a courthouse in Safford by the next morning for a filing deadline. It was already 4 in the afternoon, which meant I'd be driving well into the evening, but Rita said the client was paying extra and the owner had specifically asked if I could handle it. I said yes. I needed the overtime. The pickup was easy enough. Downtown Tucson, law office on the 3rd floor of a building near the courthouse. The lawyer's assistant handed me a large manila envelope, made me sign for it, and told me it was time-sensitive legal documents that couldn't be delayed. Standard courier stuff. The drive to Safford from Tucson is about 2.5 hours if you take Highway 191 north through some pretty empty country. I'd done the route before, but never this late in the day. By the time I got out of Tucson and onto the highway proper, the sun was starting to set, painting the mountains orange and purple. It would have been pretty if I wasn't already thinking about the long drive back in the dark. About an hour in, somewhere past Tank Verde, my van started making a strange rattling noise. Nothing dramatic, just this periodic rattle from somewhere in the engine compartment. I pulled over to check it out, but I couldn't see anything obviously wrong. The engine temperature was fine, fluids were good. I figured it was just something loose in the undercarriage that would need to be checked out when I got back to Phoenix. I got back on the road and the rattling continued but didn't get worse. Then about 20 minutes later, the van just died. No warning, no coughing or sputtering, just a complete loss of power while I was going 55 miles per hour. I coasted to the shoulder and tried to restart it. Nothing. The engine wouldn't turn over at all. I sat there for a minute trying to figure out my options. The sun had fully set by now and the highway was almost completely dark. No streetlights out here, just empty desert on both sides. I pulled out my phone to call Rita, and that's when I noticed I had no signal, not even one bar, just no service in the corner of my screen. Perfect. I got out and popped the hood, even though I didn't know enough about engines to diagnose the problem. Everything looked fine to me in the beam of my flashlight. I tried the ignition again, nothing. I was starting to seriously regret taking this delivery. I looked up and down the highway, no headlights in either direction. I hadn't seen another car in at least 10 minutes before the van died. I figured I'd have to wait for someone to come by and either give me a jump or let me use their phone. That's when I noticed the lights. Off to the left, maybe a quarter mile from the highway, there were lights. They looked like building lights, maybe a house or a small commercial structure. I couldn't see the building itself in the darkness, just the glow of what looked like fluorescent lights or maybe halogen security lights. I stood there trying to decide if I should walk over there to see if someone could help. The alternative was waiting on the side of a dark highway for a car that might not come for hours. The building, if that's what it was, seemed like the better option. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking. The ground was rough, covered in rocks and scrub brush, and I had to watch my step to avoid turning an ankle. As I got closer, I could see that the lights were coming from what looked like a small truck stop or rest area. There was a building with a flat roof, a couple of old-style fuel pumps out front, and a gravel parking area. I could see one vehicle parked near the building, a pickup truck that looked like it was from the 70s, primer gray and dusty. When I got to the building, I noticed it didn't have any signs. No name, no logo, no indication of what it was or what services it offered. Just a plain concrete block structure with a glass door and 2 windows on either side. The lights inside were on, but I couldn't see anyone moving around. I tried the door. It was unlocked. A bell chimed when I pushed it open, one of those old-fashioned bells on a spring, and I stepped inside. The place was set up like a small convenience store. Metal shelves stocked with random items, canned goods, motor oil, bags of chips that looked sun-faded. There was a counter in the back with an old cash register, the kind with physical buttons instead of a touch screen. Behind the counter was a doorway covered with a faded curtain. "Hello," I called out. "Anyone here?" No response. I walked further inside, looking around. The floor was covered in linoleum that might have been white once, but was now yellowed and cracked. The whole place had this stale smell, like it had been closed up for a long time and then suddenly opened again. "I need to use a phone," I called toward the curtained doorway. "My van broke down on the highway. Can anyone help me?" Still nothing, but I heard something from behind the curtain, a shuffling sound like someone moving around back there. Then the curtain moved slightly, just a flutter, like someone had walked past it on the other side. "Hello!" I stepped closer to the counter. "Sorry to bother you, but I really need to make a call." The curtain parted and someone stepped through. At first I thought it was a man, middle-aged, wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit that was stained with oil and dirt. But as he got closer to the counter, I realized something was off about his movements. He walked too stiffly, like his joints didn't bend properly, and his head didn't move when he walked. He just sort of glided forward with his head fixed in one position. He stopped behind the counter and looked at me, or I think he was looking at me. His eyes didn't seem to focus on anything. They were pale, almost colorless, and they didn't blink. "I need to use a phone," I said again. My voice sounded weird in the quiet store, too loud. The man, I kept thinking of him as a man, even though everything about him felt wrong, reached under the counter and placed an old rotary phone on top. the kind with a dial instead of buttons. He didn't say anything, just gestured toward the phone with one hand. The motion was jerky, mechanical. "Thanks," I said. I picked up the receiver and listened. There was no dial tone, just silence. I clicked the cradle a few times, but nothing happened. "I think it's dead." The man stared at me with those pale eyes. After a long moment, he raised his hand and pointed toward the back of the store. I followed his finger and saw another doorway I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a shelf display. There was a faint light coming from beyond it. "Phone back there?" I asked. He nodded once. The movement was too fast, his head going down and up like it was on a hinge. I didn't want to go back there. Every instinct I had was telling me to leave this place, walk back to the highway, wait in my van for help. But I also knew I couldn't sit in a dead van all night with time-sensitive documents that needed to be delivered. I needed to call dispatch, arrange for a tow, figure out a solution. I walked toward the back doorway. As I passed the man behind the counter, I caught a smell coming off him, something like motor oil mixed with old meat. I tried not to breathe through my nose. The back room was small, just a storage area with boxes stacked against the walls. In the far corner was a table with another phone on it, this one slightly more modern, with buttons instead of a dial. The light back here was dimmer, just a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. I picked up the receiver. This time there was a dial tone, thank God. I started dialing the dispatch number, but before I could finish, I heard something that made me stop. Breathing, heavy breathing coming from somewhere in the room. I spun around but didn't see anyone. The doorway I'd come through was empty, but the breathing continued, slow and labored, like someone struggling to draw air through damaged lungs. The boxes along the wall started moving. Not much, just slight shifts, like something behind them was pressing outward. One of the boxes fell over, spilling packing peanuts across the floor. I dropped the phone and backed toward the doorway. That's when I saw the hand. It came out from behind the stack of boxes, a human hand, pale and thin, with fingernails that were too long and yellow. It pressed against the floor and another hand joined it, and then something started pulling itself out from behind the boxes. I didn't stay to see what it was. I ran back through the store, past the man behind the counter who hadn't moved, and out the front door into the night. I ran across the gravel lot, across the rough desert ground, not caring about the rocks or the brush tearing at my pants. I just ran until I saw the highway and my van sitting on the shoulder exactly where I'd left it. I got in the van and locked the doors, breathing hard. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my keys out. I tried the ignition one more time, not expecting anything. The engine started immediately. No problems, no hesitation. It purred like it had never failed. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then I put the van in drive and got back on the highway, heading toward Safford. I didn't look back at where the lights had been. I didn't want to know if they were still there or if the building had disappeared into the darkness. I delivered the envelope to the Safford courthouse early the next morning, drove straight back to Phoenix, and told Rita I needed a few days off. She asked if I was feeling all right, said I looked pale. I told her I'd had a rough night and left it at that. A week later, I was talking to one of the other drivers, a guy named Pete Ramsey who'd been with Sonora Express for years. I mentioned that I'd broken down on 191 near Tank Verde, and he got this look on his face. "You see anything weird out there?" he asked. "Why?" "That stretch of road has a reputation. Couple of drivers have reported seeing buildings that don't show up on maps. Little places set back from the highway. One guy said he went inside one and barely made it back out. I asked him what he meant by barely made it back out, but Pete just shook his head and said the guy had quit right after and moved to California. Never talked about what he saw inside. I still do deliveries for Sonora Express, but I plan my routes carefully now. I make sure my van is well maintained, that I have a full tank of gas, and that I never drive that particular stretch of 191 unless it's broad daylight. And even then, I don't look too carefully at the desert on either side of the highway. I don't want to see those lights again. I don't want to know what comes out from behind the boxes in the back rooms of places that shouldn't exist. Story 7. My cousin Deanna and I decided to take a cross-country road trip this summer after I finished community college. She'd just broken up with her long-term boyfriend and wanted to get out of Arizona for a while, clear her head, see some different scenery. I'd always wanted to visit the East Coast, so we planned a route that would take us through New Mexico, Texas, and eventually up to Virginia, where she had some relatives. We left Phoenix in my old Honda Accord on a Saturday morning in early August. The car was reliable enough for in-state driving, but I was a little worried about taking it cross-country. My dad had looked it over and said it should be fine as long as we didn't push it too hard and kept up with oil changes along the way. Everything went smoothly for the first day. We made it through New Mexico without any problems, stopped for the night at a motel in Las Cruces, and got back on the road early Sunday morning. The plan was to drive through the Texas Panhandle and stop somewhere around Amarillo for the second night. But somewhere east of Lordsburg, New Mexico, we took a wrong turn, or at least I thought we did. Deanna was navigating using her phone, and the GPS seemed to think we were still on the right route, but the road we were on didn't look like an interstate. It was narrower, older, with faded line markings and patches of visible asphalt repair. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked, looking at the empty landscape on both sides. Nothing but scrub brush and low hills, no signs of civilization. Deanna frowned at her phone. "The GPS says we're on I-10, but," she zoomed in on the map. "I don't know, something seems off." We drove for another 20 minutes without seeing any signs, any exits, any other vehicles. The road just kept going straight, perfectly straight, through this unchanging desert landscape. I was starting to get uncomfortable. Even the empty stretches of Arizona had occasional signs, mile markers, something to indicate you were still on a maintained highway. Then we saw the truck stop. It appeared suddenly, like it had materialized out of the heat shimmer on the road. One moment there was nothing but empty horizon, the next moment there were buildings and signs maybe a quarter mile ahead. "Thank God," Deanna said. "I need to pee so badly." As we got closer, I could see the place was bigger than I expected. There was a large main building with what looked like a restaurant and convenience store, separate fuel islands for trucks and cars, and a parking area that could probably hold 30 vehicles. But the weird thing was there were no vehicles. The lot was completely empty. "Maybe it's closed," I suggested, but the lights were all on and I could see movement through the windows of the main building. We pulled up to one of the car fuel pumps, and I got out to fill the tank. The sun was brutal, even though it was only mid-morning. That dry desert heat that makes your skin feel tight. Deanna went inside to use the restroom while I pumped gas. The pump was old, like really old. It had a mechanical counter that flipped numbers instead of a digital display, and you had to hold the trigger the whole time because there was no clip to lock it in place. As I stood there watching the numbers slowly flip over, I noticed something strange about the main building. The windows were tinted, but I could see shapes moving inside. Lots of shapes. People, I assumed, customers and staff, but they were all moving in this synchronized way, all at the same pace, all in the same direction. Like a group of people doing a choreographed dance, except there was no reason for them to be moving like that. I finished pumping and hung up the nozzle. The total came to an amount that seemed too low for how many gallons I'd pumped, but I wasn't about to complain. I went inside to pay and find Deanna. The interior of the building was cold, not just air-conditioned, actually cold like a refrigerator. My breath didn't fog, but it was cold enough that I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. The layout was standard truck stop fare, aisles of snacks and supplies, a hot food section, a couple of arcade games near the back, and a counter with a register. There were people inside, at least a dozen of them scattered around the store, but they weren't doing anything. Not shopping, not eating, not talking, just standing in various spots facing different directions. Some were facing the walls. One woman was standing in front of the magazine rack with her face about 2 inches from the magazines, not moving. "Excuse me," I said to the clerk at the register. He was a young guy, Hispanic, wearing a vest with a name tag that said Lewis. "I need to pay for pump 3. He didn't respond right away. He was staring at something behind me, his expression completely blank. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was nothing there, just an aisle of motor oil and windshield washer fluid. "Louis," I said, "pump 3. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and his eyes took a second to focus. When they did, he smiled, but it was wrong. The smile was too wide and didn't reach his eyes. "Pump 3, he repeated in a flat voice. "That'll be $11. I paid with cash, and his hands moved mechanically, taking the bills, opening the register, counting out change. His movements were jerky, like someone who was just learning how to use their body. "Where's the restroom?" I asked. He pointed toward the back of the store without speaking. I walked in that direction, looking for Deanna. I found the restrooms easily enough, 2 single-occupancy rooms with those old-fashioned pictogram signs on the doors. The women's room door was closed, and I could see light under it, so I assumed Deanna was still in there. I waited in the hallway, and that's when I heard the sound. It was coming from further down the hall, past the restrooms where there was a door marked "Employees Only." A wet scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across a floor. And underneath that, a voice. Someone counting numbers in Spanish. "Uno, dos, tres, cuatro." Over and over again, the same 4 numbers in the same rhythm as the scraping sound. The women's restroom door opened and Deanna came out. She looked pale. "We need to leave," she said quietly. "What's wrong?" There was someone in there with me, in the stall next to mine. I could hear them breathing, but when I came out, all the stalls were empty. And she held up her hands. They were shaking. The mirror, my reflection, was delayed. "What do you mean, delayed?" "When I moved, my reflection didn't move at the same time. It was like watching myself on a video with lag. I'd raise my hand, and a second later my reflection would raise its hand. I grabbed her arm and we started walking quickly toward the front of the store. The people who'd been standing motionless were still there, in the exact same positions. None of them had moved. As we passed by one man standing in the snack aisle, I glanced at his face. His eyes were open, but they weren't focused on anything. They were rolled back slightly, showing mostly white. We made it to the door and pushed outside into the heat. It felt good after the unnatural cold of the store interior. We got in the car and I started the engine, and that's when Deanna grabbed my arm hard. "Look at the fuel pump," she said. I looked. The numbers on the mechanical counter were spinning backward, clicking rapidly as they decreased. They went past 0 and kept going, showing negative numbers now, the flipping digits moving faster and faster. I put the car in drive and got us out of there, pulling back onto the empty highway. In my rearview mirror, I could see the truck stop receding behind us. The people inside were pressed against the windows now, all of them, their faces against the glass, watching us leave. "What the hell was that place?" Deanna asked. Her voice was shaky. "I don't know." I kept my foot on the gas, pushing the Honda as fast as I dared. "Did you see a name? Any signs?" She shook her head. "I don't think there were any. No name, no logo, nothing." We drove in silence for about 10 minutes, and then the landscape changed abruptly. Suddenly there were signs, mile markers, and in the distance I could see other vehicles on the road. The GPS on Deanna's phone chimed, announcing that we were approaching an exit for a town called Lordsburg. "Wait," Deanna said, looking at her phone. "We're west of Lordsburg. We passed Lordsburg almost an hour ago." She was right. Somehow we'd driven in a loop, or the road had looped or something. We'd lost about 40 miles of progress in at least an hour of time. Her phone showed it was almost noon, but I could have sworn it was still mid-morning when we'd left the truck stop. We stopped at an actual, normal gas station in Lordsburg to regroup. I checked my wallet and realized I was missing the cash I'd had. Not just the money I'd paid for gas, all of my cash, about $60 that I'd had in my wallet before we stopped. The only thing left was a receipt from the truck stop, printed on old thermal paper that was already starting to fade. The receipt showed I'd paid for pump 3, but instead of a dollar amount, it just said "paid in full" in all caps. Deanna's hands were still shaking when she tried to hold her phone. She kept checking the mirror app on her phone, watching her reflection, making sure it moved when she moved. "It was delayed," she kept saying. My reflection was delayed. We continued the trip, but we avoided any stops that weren't in visible towns with multiple buildings and other people around. We didn't talk much about what had happened at that truck stop. What could we say? We stopped at a place that shouldn't have existed, seen people who weren't quite right, and somehow lost time and distance in the process. When we finally made it back to Phoenix 3 weeks later, I tried to find that stretch of road again on the map, tried to figure out exactly where we'd been. I couldn't find it. A highway between Lordsburg and where we'd thought we were didn't have any services, any exits, anything that matched what we'd seen. Deanna still lives in Phoenix, but she won't drive east anymore. When I suggested another road trip last year, maybe up to Colorado, she said she'd rather fly. She said she doesn't trust roads that appear out of nowhere, buildings that have no names, or reflections that don't move when they should. And I think about that receipt sometimes, the one that said "paid in full." I wonder what I actually paid for at that place. It wasn't gas. We had less fuel when we left than we should have had. So what did I pay for? What did we both pay for? And what would have happened if we'd stayed longer, if we'd gone through that door marked "employees only"? If we'd waited to see what those people pressed against the windows wanted from us? I don't know. And I'm grateful I never found out. Story 8. I met this guy named Trevor Hutchins at a motorcycle rally in Phoenix when I was 24. We got to talking about long-distance riding, and he mentioned he was planning a solo trip from Phoenix to Albuquerque and asked if I wanted to come along. I'd only had my bike for about a year, a used Yamaha Cruiser that I'd bought with my tax return, but I was getting confident on it, and the idea of a multi-day ride sounded appealing. We left on a Thursday morning in late September, taking I-17 north out of Phoenix and then cutting east toward Holbrook where we'd pick up I-40. The weather was perfect, cool morning air that would warm up by midday, but nothing too extreme. Trevor was riding a bigger bike, a Harley Davidson he'd owned for years, and he set a comfortable pace that kept us moving without feeling rushed. The first day went smoothly. We made it to Holbrook by early afternoon, gassed up, grabbed lunch at a diner, and got back on the road. The plan was to make it to Gallup, New Mexico by evening and find a motel there. But about an hour east of Holbrook, Trevor's bike started having problems. He signaled and pulled over to the shoulder, and I followed him. He killed the engine and checked things over, saying it felt like the bike was losing power intermittently. "Might be the fuel filter," he said, poking around the engine. "Or could be electrical, hard to tell." We were in the middle of nowhere, long stretches of high desert on both sides of the interstate. There was an exit sign visible ahead, maybe half a mile up, advertising fuel and food. "Let's see if we can make it to that exit," Trevor said. "Maybe there's someone there who can take a look at it." We rode slowly to the exit, Trevor's Harley coughing and sputtering the whole way. The exit ramp curved around and led to a small access road. Following the signs, we rode about a mile north and found a truck stop called Apache Junction Travel Center. The name was confusing. Apache Junction is nowhere near this part of Arizona, but I figured it was just a franchise name that didn't mean anything geographical. The place was set up like a standard truck stop, fuel pumps, a main building, and a separate garage bay for repairs. The parking lot had maybe 6 or 7 trucks in it, which seemed reasonable for a Thursday afternoon. Trevor pulled his bike up near the garage and killed the engine. A mechanic came out, wiping his hands on a rag. He was an older white guy, probably in his 60s, with a long gray beard and a baseball cap that had seen better days. "Help you?" he asked. "Bike's losing power," Trevor explained. "Thought maybe you could take a look, see if it's something simple." The mechanic walked around the Harley, looking it over. "I can check it out, but it'll be a couple hours, backed up with truck repairs right now." Trevor looked at me. "You okay waiting?" I shrugged. "Yeah, sure. Not like we're on a tight schedule." The mechanic wheeled Trevor's bike into the garage, and we went into the main building to kill time. The place had a small restaurant area with booths and a counter, and a convenience store section with the usual snacks and supplies. There were a few other people scattered around, a couple of truckers eating at the counter, a family with kids in one of the booths, a woman browsing the magazine rack. We ordered coffee and sandwiches and sat in a booth near the window where we could see the garage. The food was standard diner fare, nothing special but not bad. We talked about the route ahead, planned where we'd stop the next day, discussed whether we should take any detours to see interesting sights along the way. About an hour passed. I went to the restroom, came back, and Trevor was staring out the window with a strange expression on his face. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Those trucks in the lot," he said. "They haven't moved." "Well, yeah. They're parked." "No, I mean the drivers haven't moved. Look." I looked out at the parking lot. He was right. The trucks were all still there in the same positions, and I could see drivers sitting in some of the cabs, but they were completely still. Not moving around, not getting in or out, not even shifting position, just sitting there. "Maybe they're sleeping," I suggested. "For an hour, all of them, at the same time." I didn't have a good answer for that. We watched for a few more minutes and none of the drivers moved, not once. They just sat in their cabs like mannequins. The family that had been in the booth across from us got up to leave. The kids were young, maybe 5 and 7, and they'd been fairly active when we came in, coloring on placemats and asking their parents questions. But now they walked out in complete silence, moving in single file behind their parents, their faces blank. The mother held the door for them, and I noticed her hand was shaking. "That was weird," Trevor said. "What was?" "That family. The kids were loud when we sat down. Now they're acting like zombies." He was right, but I didn't want to think too hard about it. I told myself kids get tired, parents tell them to settle down, nothing unusual about that. Another 30 minutes passed. I went to check on the bike, and the mechanic said he was still working on it, found a problem with the fuel line that needed replacing. He had the parts, but it would be at least another hour. When I came back inside, Trevor was gone. His coffee was still sitting on the table, half full, but he wasn't in the booth. I checked the restroom, empty. I walked around the store section, thinking maybe he'd gone to browse, but I didn't see him anywhere. I asked the woman behind the register if she'd seen my friend. She looked at me with this blank expression and said, "Friend," like she didn't understand the concept. "Yeah, the guy I was sitting with, dark hair, leather jacket." "Did you see where he went?" She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly shook her head. "No, friend. He was just here. We've been here for over an hour." She didn't respond, just kept staring at me with that empty expression. Her eyes didn't blink. I felt my stomach tighten. I went back outside, thinking maybe Trevor had gone to check on his bike, but he wasn't in the garage either. The mechanic was working on a truck now, not Trevor's Harley, and when I asked him where Trevor was, he said, "Who?" "The guy with the Harley. We came in together." The mechanic looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "No Harley," he said, "just trucks today." But I could see Trevor's bike. It was right there, parked in the corner of the garage, partially disassembled. "That's his bike," I said, pointing at it. The mechanic followed my finger, looked at the empty corner I was pointing to, and said, "Nothing there, buddy." My heart started pounding. I walked over to where the Harley was parked and put my hand on the seat. It was cold, like it had been sitting there for days, not hours. The mechanic watched me touching empty air, his expression never changing. I went back inside and pulled out my phone to call Trevor. No signal, 0 bars. I tried anyway, the call wouldn't connect. I looked around the restaurant area and I realized everyone inside was staring at me now. The truckers at the counter, the woman at the register, a few other people I hadn't noticed before. All of them facing me, not moving, just staring with those blank expressions. I backed toward the door and they all stood up at the same time. Not rushing me, not making any aggressive moves, just standing up in perfect synchronization. The sound of their chairs scraping against the floor all at once made my skin crawl. I ran to my bike, which was parked out front near the fuel pumps. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking, expecting those people to come pouring out of the building. But when I glanced back, they were all standing at the windows, pressed against the glass, watching me. Their faces were completely expressionless. My bike started on the first try. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed back toward the interstate, riding faster than I should have been. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see vehicles following me, but the road behind me stayed empty. When I got back to the interstate, I pulled over at the first normal-looking exit I found. A regular gas station with other people around, normal people who moved and talked and blinked. I tried calling Trevor again. This time the call connected, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking where he was, saying I'd had to leave the truck stop, asking him to call me back as soon as he got this. He never called back. I waited at that gas station for 2 hours, calling every 15 minutes, leaving messages, sending texts. Nothing. Finally, I rode back to Phoenix alone, a 6-hour ride that should have been done with a friend. When I got home, I filed a missing persons report. The police asked for the location of the truck stop where I'd last seen Trevor. I gave them the exit number, described the place in detail. They said they'd check it out. 2 days later, a detective called me. He said there was no truck stop at that exit. No Apache Junction Travel Center, no garage, no building at all, just an old abandoned gas station that had been closed for years. I drove back out there myself the following week, took the same exit, followed the same access road. He was right. There was nothing there but a crumbling foundation and some old pumps that didn't work. No main building, no garage, just weeds growing up through cracked pavement. But I know we were there. I know Trevor's bike was being repaired. I know I saw those people standing at the windows, watching me leave. And I know that somewhere, Trevor is probably still at that truck stop, sitting in a booth, wondering why I left him there. I sold my motorcycle a month later. I told people I just wasn't into riding anymore, but the truth is I can't get on a bike without thinking about that place. Without wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed. Without thinking about Trevor sitting in that garage, watching a mechanic work on a bike that nobody else can see, waiting for a repair that will never be finished. Story 9. The company I worked for, a pharmaceutical distributor called MedSource Logistics, had a contract to deliver temperature-controlled medications to hospitals and clinics across the southwestern United States. I'd been driving for them for about 3 years when I got assigned to a new route that would take me through some of the more remote parts of Arizona. My supervisor, Janet Torres, briefed me on the route in the dispatch office on a Monday morning. Phoenix to Show Low, then northeast to St. John's, then a couple of small clinics in even smaller towns I'd never heard of. The last stop was a tribal health clinic on the Navajo Nation, way out near the Arizona-New Mexico border. That last stop might be tricky, Janet said, showing me the location on a map. It's pretty remote. You'll want to make sure you get there during daylight hours. I asked why, and she just said the roads weren't well maintained, and it was easy to get lost after dark. Standard advice for rural deliveries, nothing that concerned me. I loaded up the refrigerated van Tuesday morning and headed out. The deliveries in Show Low and St. John's went smoothly, right on schedule. By the time I finished the small town stops, it was about 5 in the afternoon, and I still had roughly 2 hours of driving to reach the tribal health clinic. The route took me off the main highways onto smaller state roads, then onto even smaller county roads, and finally onto what was barely more than a dirt track. My GPS kept insisting I was on the right path, but I had serious doubts. The landscape was beautiful in that harsh desert way, red rock formations, scrub brush, distant mesas, but there was no indication that anyone had driven this road recently. About 20 minutes down this dirt track, I saw a building ahead. It looked like an old truck stop or gas station, set back from the road maybe 50 yards. The structure was weathered, sun-bleached wood and corrugated metal, but there were lights on inside and I could see vehicles parked around it. I slowed down, trying to figure out if this was my destination. It didn't look like a health clinic, but maybe the clinic shared a building with other services. Remote communities sometimes consolidated facilities. I pulled into the dirt parking area and killed the engine. There were 3 vehicles parked near the building: a pickup truck with local plates, a sedan that had seen better days, and an old RV that looked like it hadn't moved in months. No signs indicated what this place was, no posted hours or services. I got out and walked toward the entrance. The door was propped open with a cinder block, and I could hear voices inside. Music too, something that sounded like country western from the 70s. Inside, the place was set up like a small bar or roadhouse. There was a counter with stools, a few tables, and a jukebox in the corner that was probably the source of the music. 3 people were sitting at different spots around the room: an older native man at the counter, a white woman at one of the tables, and a younger guy, maybe Hispanic, standing near the jukebox like he was trying to decide what to play next. The person behind the counter was a woman in her 40s with long dark hair and a tired expression. She looked up when I came in. "Help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for the tribal health clinic," I said. "I have a delivery." She shook her head. "No clinic here. This is just a store. The clinic is another 10 miles north." "Oh, sorry, I thought." I gestured vaguely at the building. "Is there a sign or something I missed?" "No sign," she said. "Most people who come here already know where they're going." That seemed like an odd way to run a business, but I wasn't going to argue. I thanked her and turned to leave. That's when the man at the counter spoke. "You should stay for a bit," he said without looking at me. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "Not good to drive these roads in the evening." "I'll be fine," I said. "I need to make this delivery before they close." "They're already closed," the man said. He still wasn't looking at me, just staring down at the drink in front of him. "Clinic closes at 5. You won't make it in time." I checked my watch. It was 5:40. He might be right, but I had to try. The medications I was carrying needed to be stored at the clinic's refrigeration unit, and I couldn't just take them back to Phoenix. "I still need to get there," I said. They'll have someone on call." The woman at the table finally spoke. "Don't go north." Her voice was quiet but insistent. "Not in the evening, not this time of year." "Why?" I asked. None of them answered. They just looked at me with these expressions that I couldn't quite read. Not hostile, but not friendly either. More like pity. Like they felt sorry for me but weren't going to do anything to help. I left and got back in my van. The whole interaction had been strange, but I had a job to do. I pulled back onto the dirt road and continued north, following the GPS directions. The sun was getting low now, painting the landscape in orange and purple tones. Beautiful, but I was starting to understand why people had warned me about driving these roads at night. There were no lights, no signs, nothing to navigate by except the GPS and the faint track of the road itself. About 15 minutes later, I saw another building ahead. This one looked more official, a modern prefab structure with a parking lot and a sign that said Tribal Health Services in both English and what I assumed was Navajo. I pulled into the lot, relieved. I'd made it. The building's lights were on, so hopefully someone was still there to receive the delivery. I got out and went to the door. It was locked. I knocked and waited. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, still nothing. There was a phone number posted on the door for after-hours emergencies. I called it, and a woman answered on the third ring. "Tribal Health, this is Melissa." "Hi, I'm with MedSource Logistics. I have a delivery of temperature-controlled medications. I know you're closed, but is there someone who can meet me to receive this? It can't stay in my van overnight." "What delivery? We weren't expecting anything today." I felt my stomach drop. "I have a scheduled delivery, Tuesday, clinic in." I checked the address on my paperwork. "This location, it's definitely on my manifest." "Hold on." I heard her typing, then a long pause. "I don't see anything in our system. Are you sure you have the right clinic?" I read her the address on my paperwork. She confirmed it was their address, but insisted they had no record of expecting a delivery. She suggested I call my dispatch to sort it out. I hung up and called Janet. It went to voicemail. She'd left for the day. I tried the main dispatch line and got a recording saying the office was closed, of course. So now I was stuck with a van full of medications that needed refrigeration at a closed clinic in the middle of nowhere with the sun setting fast. Great. I sat in the van trying to figure out my options. The nearest town big enough to have a hotel was probably St. John's, at least 90 minutes back the way I'd come. I'd have to drive in the dark on those poorly maintained roads, hoping I didn't get lost or have a breakdown. That's when I noticed the headlights. A vehicle was coming up the road toward the clinic, moving fast. It pulled into the lot and stopped next to my van. It was a pickup truck, and the driver got out quickly. It was the older native man from the roadhouse. He walked over to my window and gestured for me to roll it down. "You need to leave," he said. No greeting, no explanation, just that urgent statement. "I have medications that need to be stored properly," I told him. "I can't just leave them in front of the door and go. Now, I can't do that. They're controlled substances. I need a signature. I need to." "Listen to me," he said, and his tone made me stop talking. "Every few months, someone comes through here who doesn't listen. They stay after dark. They think they know better, and they're never quite right afterward, the ones who make it out." "What are you talking about?" He pointed at the horizon. The sun was touching the distant mesas now, maybe 10 minutes from full dark. "Things come out here when it gets dark, things that shouldn't be. You're not from here, you don't have protection, and you need to leave right now." I wanted to argue, to tell him I had a job to do, that I couldn't just abandon expensive medications in a parking lot. But something about his expression, the genuine fear in his eyes, made me reconsider. "What things?" I asked. "Doesn't matter what they are, matters that they're coming. You can feel it, can't you?" And I could. The temperature had dropped suddenly more than made sense for sunset. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name, and it was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, no sound of wind, just silence. "Leave the medications," the man said again. "I'll make sure they get inside. You need to go south right now and don't stop until you're back to the main highway." I looked at his face, at the urgency there, and I made a decision. I got out, opened the back of the van, and pulled out the insulated containers with the medications. I set them by the clinic door and grabbed my clipboard. "You'll need to sign." "No signatures," he interrupted. "Just go." I got back in the van and started the engine. The man was already back in his truck, and he pulled out ahead of me, heading south. I followed him, looking in my rearview mirror at the clinic getting smaller behind us. That's when I saw them. Figures, lots of figures, emerging from the desert around the clinic. They were tall and thin, moving in this strange, stilted way like their joints bent in the wrong places. They surrounded the building, and one of them picked up the containers I'd left by the door. It held them up, examining them, its movements jerky and insectoid. I pressed the gas pedal harder, following the taillights of the pickup truck ahead of me. We drove fast, faster than was safe on that dirt road, but I didn't care. I wanted as much distance as possible between me and whatever those things were. When we finally reached the roadhouse, the pickup truck pulled in, and so did I. The sun had fully set now, and the darkness was complete. The man got out and walked over to my van. "You're lucky," he said. "They're slower to come out this early in the season. Another month and you wouldn't have made it." "What were those things?" "You don't need to know, you just need to not come back here after dark." He started walking toward the roadhouse, then stopped and turned back. "Your delivery will be fine. Someone from the clinic will pick it up in the morning. They know how this works." I spent the night at the roadhouse. They had a couple of rooms they rented out, basic but clean. The woman who ran the place gave me a room key and told me not to go outside until morning. I didn't argue. Through my window, I could hear things moving around outside during the night. Footsteps that didn't sound quite right, scraping sounds, what might have been voices, but in no language I recognized. I lay in bed with the lights on and didn't sleep until I saw the first light of dawn. In the morning, I drove back to Phoenix and filed my delivery report. I marked it as completed and signed off by on-site personnel, which wasn't technically true, but I didn't know how else to document it. Janet called me later that day and said she'd heard from the clinic. They'd received the medications and everything was fine. "How'd the delivery go?" she asked. "Fine," I lied. "No problems." "Good, because that route is yours now. You'll be doing it every 2 weeks. I quit 2 days later. Told Janet I was taking a job closer to home, better hours, which wasn't true. I just couldn't go back to that place. Couldn't risk being there after dark again, seeing those figures moving through the desert, hearing those sounds outside the window. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed at the clinic when the man told me to leave. Whether I would have made it through the night. Whether I'd be one of those people he mentioned. The ones who make it out but are never quite right afterward. I'm glad I didn't find out. Story 10. I spent 3 years working as an independent contractor for a company that serviced vending machines across Arizona. It was solitary work, which I liked. I'd get a list of locations that needed restocking or repairs, load up my van with supplies, and spend the day driving from place to place. Most of the locations were businesses or schools, but some were in more unusual spots, rest stops, remote gas stations, even a few correctional facilities. In late November, I got assigned to service a location I'd never been to before. The work order just listed it as Painted Desert Travel Stop with GPS coordinates rather than a street address. The note said it was a privately owned truck stop that had 6 vending machines, 2 snack machines, 2 soda machines, and 2 coffee machines. I loaded up my van with the usual supplies and headed out early on a Wednesday morning. The drive took me east on I-40, and I took an exit near the Petrified Forest National Park. The GPS led me north on a narrow 2-lane road that seemed to go nowhere. After about 20 minutes, I saw the truck stop ahead. It was a sprawling complex, bigger than I expected for such a remote location. There was a large main building, separate fuel islands, a garage structure, and even what looked like a small motel. The parking lot had a dozen trucks in it, which seemed like good business for the middle of the week. I pulled into a spot near the main building and grabbed my toolkit. The vending machines were usually inside near the restrooms or dining area, easy to find. I went in through the main entrance and immediately noticed how dark it was inside. There were lights on, but they were dim, and the windows were covered with what looked like dark tinting that blocked most of the outside light. The layout was confusing. I'd been in hundreds of truck stops, and they all followed basically the same design, but this one had hallways that branched off in weird directions and rooms that seemed to be in the wrong places. I found one vending machine quickly enough, a snack machine in the corner of what looked like a dining area, but the others took longer to locate. While I was working on refilling the snack machine, I noticed something strange. There were people in the dining area sitting at tables, but none of them were eating or drinking or talking. They were just sitting there, staring at nothing. I counted 6 people, all spread out at different tables, all with the same blank expression. "Excuse me," I called out to the room in general. "Anyone know where the other vending machines are?" Nobody responded. Nobody even looked at me. They just kept staring. I finished with the snack machine and went searching for the others. I found a soda machine down a hallway near the restrooms, and while I was loading it with new bottles, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw a man standing at the end of the hallway watching me. "Need some help?" he asked. His voice sounded normal enough, but something about his posture was off. He stood too straight, too rigid, like a soldier at attention. "Just servicing the machines," I told him. "I'm looking for the coffee machines. Work order says there are 2, but I've only found regular vending machines so far." He pointed down the hallway in the opposite direction from where he'd come. "Through there, take the second right." I thanked him and followed his directions, and I found myself in a section of the building that looked different from the rest. The walls here were concrete blocks instead of drywall, and the floor was bare concrete. The lighting was even dimmer, just a few bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. I found the coffee machines in a small room that might have been a break room at one point. Both machines were old models, the kind I hadn't seen in years. They still used paper cups and had mechanical push-button selectors. I got to work checking them over and loading in fresh supplies. That's when I heard the sound from behind the wall. A thumping sound, rhythmic and steady, like someone hitting the wall with their fist. Thump, 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 then silence. Then it started again. Thump, thump, thump. I tried to ignore it and focused on my work. But the thumping continued, and after a few minutes I realized it was coming from multiple spots along the wall. Different rhythms, different speeds, like several people were hitting the wall at the same time. I finished up quickly and got out of that room. As I was walking back toward the main building, I passed by a door that was slightly ajar. I glanced through the gap and saw what looked like a storage room, but there were people in there. At least a dozen people, standing in rows facing the back wall. Not moving, not talking, just standing there. I stopped and watched for a moment, trying to figure out what they were doing. One of them turned their head slightly and I saw their face in profile. Their eyes were closed. All of them had their eyes closed, standing in the dark storage room with their eyes closed. I backed away from the door and walked quickly toward the exit. I still had 2 machines left to service, but I decided I'd come back another day. Something about this place felt wrong and I wanted to get out. As I was heading toward the door, the man who'd given me directions earlier appeared in front of me. I hadn't seen him approach. He just suddenly appeared in the hallway, blocking my path. "Finished already?" he asked. "I need to get more supplies from my van," I lied. "I'll come back to finish the rest." "You haven't done all the machines yet." "I know. I'll be back. The machines need to be serviced today. It's in the contract." I felt uncomfortable now. "Look, I'm low on some items. I'll come back tomorrow with a full load and finish up. It's not a problem." He didn't move from the hallway. "You need to finish today. I don't have everything I need." He took a step closer to me, and that's when I noticed his eyes. They were wrong. The pupils were too large, taking up almost the entire iris, and they didn't seem to focus properly. They moved independently, like a chameleon's eyes, each one looking in a slightly different direction. "Service all the machines," he said, "then you can leave." I backed up a step. "I'm going to my van, don't follow me." I turned and walked quickly toward the exit, half expecting him to grab me, but he didn't. When I glanced back, he was just standing in the hallway, watching me with those wrong eyes. I got outside and the sunlight felt like a blessing. I practically ran to my van and got inside, locking the doors. Through the windshield I could see the main building, and there were faces in the windows now. Dozens of faces, all pressed against the glass, all looking out at me. I started the engine and drove out of that parking lot as fast as I could safely manage. On the road back to the interstate, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see vehicles following me, but the road stayed empty. When I got back to the office, I told my supervisor I couldn't complete the service at that location and they'd need to send someone else. He looked confused and pulled up the work order on his computer. "What location? I don't have any record of a work order for Painted Desert Travel Stop." "It was on my list this morning," I said. "The one with the GPS coordinates." He had me show him my copy of the work order. I pulled it out and we both looked at it. The paper was there with the location name and coordinates, but the ink was faded. Not just a little faded, almost completely gone, like the paper was decades old instead of freshly printed. We tried to pull up the location in our client database. Nothing. No Painted Desert Travel Stop in the system, no service history, no contract. It was like the place didn't exist. I drove back out there a week later, in broad daylight, with my girlfriend riding along so I wouldn't be alone. I wanted to prove to myself that the place was real, that I hadn't imagined it. We took the same exit, followed the same road, but there was nothing there. No truck stop, no buildings, no sign that anything had ever been there, just empty desert and the road continuing north. My girlfriend asked me if I was sure this was the right place. I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I had that work order in my van, the one with the fading ink, and when I looked at it again, I could barely read the text. A few more days and it would be completely blank. I found a different job a couple months later, something that didn't require driving to remote locations. I told people I wanted better hours, more stability, but the truth is I couldn't shake the memory of that place. The people sitting motionless in the dark dining area. The sound of multiple fists hitting the wall in different rhythms. The faces pressed against the windows, watching me leave. And most of all, that man with eyes that moved independently, telling me I couldn't leave until I serviced all the machines. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd finished servicing all 6 machines, would they have let me go? Or would I still be there, standing in some back room with my eyes closed, facing the wall, waiting for something I don't understand? I'm glad I didn't find out. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.